Hello, I'm Dave Reilly. Welcome to What a Relief. On this two-part series, we're going to explore the carving of a picture frame, or perhaps more accurately, production carving. The molding on a picture frame requires a lot of repetitive types of carving. So there is a technique to doing this that's a little bit different from doing just a single one-off type of carving. And we're going to use a picture frame as the subject of this article. I have here a simple frame that's carved in mahogany, and the type of element that we'll be carving is what is referred to as an egg and dart. It's a very common type of decorative carving. As the name implies, it is based on an egg, and then it alternates with a dart or arrow-shaped element. I have here a number of small samples that I've done. Now this one is in basswood. As you can see, here is the egg, and then this little element here is what would be referred to as the dart. You can get virtually an infinite number of variations in size and proportion. This is in mahogany. Here's more mahogany, but this has the lip along the front. There are just so many different variations that we're not going to give you an exact figure or an exact size for this carving that I'm going to do today. As you will see, that it is all dependent upon the frames that you have, the proportions, and your own personal taste. Here are some examples of the type of the egg and dart that can be carved. As you can see, there's all different variations. This here is what we will be carving today. I've also included a small dimensioned sketch, although don't be too concerned about the dimensions because they will vary depending upon the size frame and your own personal taste. So in this first part, we're going to cover the design of the frame, the design of your element, making a template, and then the final layout to prepare it for carving. Now the design of the frame all depends upon your artwork. The first thing you do is select the artwork that you're going to frame, and then pick an appropriate size mat. From there, you will determine what the outside dimensions of your frame is going to be. At this point, then you can start to decide the proportions, the width of your frame, how thick it's going to be, perhaps the material that you're going to use, and where you're going to put the element that you're going to carve. It doesn't have to be right along the edge. Here's an example of if you were doing a nautical carving, this rope design carved in flat on the upper surface of the frame might be very suitable. But this is the time that you'll have to decide that. This will give you the approximate size of your frame. I say approximate because the element, when you get it designed, that's going to influence a bit about the size of your work. Now, designing the carved element is going to be an interesting project. Here I've used the egg and dart motif. It's a rather straightforward, very simple type of carving. Now I have here an enlarged view, easier for you to see. This would be considered as the egg, and then this area in here in between, it would be the dart. The egg and dart are alternating designs. When we talk about an element, which I'll be doing a lot of, I consider the element as the egg with the dart. So when you're doing your measurements and determining the size of your carved element, you're thinking of the egg and the dart plus any spacing that is in between. Now that you have the approximate shape of your element calculated with the dart, one more step that you might want to go through is to check the tools that you have available to you. If you can make this cut, example here in this curve, with a single tool, with a single cut, you're much better off. If you don't have a tool that just fits that curve, you might consider making an adjustment on that curve so that you can do it with a single cut with one tool. Now on this frame that I showed you, there are 58 elements. That means there are 116 cuts that you're going to make on this frame. Now, if you have to make 2 cuts on each side, maybe even changing tools, now you're up into 200 cuts. And this is a production. I mentioned this before, that you want to do this efficiently. This is production work. You want to make it as simple as you can so that you can do it as efficiently as you can. Now, once you have this dimension calculated, then you can start and do the measurement. Now, the elements are going to be between these 2 lines as an example on this. This is a scale model of the frame that I have shown you. This is the dimension. Take the dimension of your element plus any spacing that's in between and divide it into this distance. The chances are it's not going to come out even. So what you're going to have to do is make a slight adjustment in the length of your frame so that these elements with their spacing in between will come out perfectly even. What I usually do is I do all this calculating on the long side of the frame, and then when I get that satisfactory, then the short side of the frame takes care of itself. It will simply be a multiple of my individual elements. Now that you have determined the exact size of your element based on the size of your frame, everything is coming out even as you want it, it's time to make a template. Now, when I do a template, I usually use this thin sheet metal. This is 10 thousandths thick steel, very soft, bends very nicely. You can get this at hardware stores or home centers. I don't use cardboard because it'll wear, and on an extensive layout like this, eventually it's going to change shape just from its use. So draw out your full-sized template, get it right to scale, then using the old grammar school method of folding your material over, you can cut out the correct size template. Now you have your true size of your template. Then the next step is to take that, and then I glue it onto my template material, which I have already cut to the exact width that I want. I use carpet tape so it stays down very permanently. Then take your pair of tin snips, and you can just start this, trimming it to shape. Then, since these are going to be very rough edges, you're going to have to take a file or emery paper and file this right to your line to get it as precise as you can. And polish this edge and get it nice and smooth, because this ragged edge is just going to cut through your pencil as you drag your pencil around it while you're doing your layout. When that is all shaped nice and smooth, then, as you can see here, we have a step in this molding. So the template will bend over this up to that step. So you will just take a pair of pliers, needle nose, and just carefully bend them up at right angles. You will do the curve of the template as the last step, and then depending upon the height of the step, you'll come again and make a second bend. You want to leave a lot of material, certainly sufficient for you to hold it when you're doing your layout. And then adjust that, and then you can do your bending just carefully bend that radius so that it'll fit properly on your curved piece. And when that's done, you will end up with a correct, permanent template for your layout. Very straightforward, very simple. Now in this particular design, I have 2 grooves cut in the top just to add a little texture and a little modeling. So that those are lined up properly, it's important to have a center line drawn on your stock before you carve it. So what I've done is I make a small straight edge so that I can then just draw my center line, because you're going to need that during the carving. And this is just, again, the same material bent up with the same curve, but just straight on either side. Now that we have the template all ready to go, the dimension for this one turns out to be 1/2 inch, but I'm going to add a 1/16 of an inch for my separation between each element. So that's going to be 9/16. I can take my rule and as carefully as I can set it, in this case, for the 9/16. Now taking my straight edge that I've made, I need to bring a line up from this corner, right in here, because this is going to indicate where my lines are going to start. This is where my measuring comes from. Then I'm going to make a trial fit with my dividers, starting right on my line, and I'm just going to walk right down the line. You don't need to make any marks in the wood at this time. You're just testing to see that your dimension is correct. Now, if it comes out even, it is somewhat close to a miracle. The odds of that happening are pretty slim. You may have to make a couple of adjustments of your dividers. You see now I'm off considerably. So I'm going to have to open these up, start all over, and keep doing this until I come out even. Now, after a couple of tries, now I've come out perfectly even. Now I will go back, starting all over, but this time I'm going to make a deep pinhole, because this is going to be my reference. Now I have a pinhole. I will take my pencil and just remark all of those so that I don't lose them. Make them a little bit more permanent. And this will be my reference now for my layout. Now I've completed the layout of all the elements, and now I want to locate a center line and sketch that in, because that center line is going to be useful for aligning your carving while you're doing your carving. And you do that on each one. This can be established pretty much by eye. It doesn't have to be too precise. So now if you have glued your frame together, take it apart, because it's going to be very difficult to carve this if it is a completed frame. You carve each section, each side, as an individual piece. The location of each one of the elements has already been marked out. That's what we did when we used the dividers to align everything and get everything to come out even. Now with our template, we're just going to line up. In this case, I'm using the left side of the template on my starting line, and I will draw in the outline that I'm going to carve. At this time, I'm going to double check that I have my center line located. And then it's just a matter of just stepping around each one, check to see that we have our center line, and around we go. For all of these layout, I much prefer to use these 1/2 millimeter mechanical pencils. You get a consistently wide line. It doesn't change its width as it wears away as an ordinary pencil. So you can certainly do more precise work. Now this is why having a center line on your template is important. You're going to make a center line in each one now, because this is going to help you to align the little decorative groove that is in your work. This doesn't have to be very precise. It just allows you to be sure that that groove, that as you cut it, is going to be straight. You'll do the centering more or less by eye. Now the last little bit of layout is I take just by using my finger as a guide, come up an eighth, perhaps a little more on each one. This is going to define where that decorative groove. Now, depending upon the configuration of your carving on your frame, sometimes it's rather hard to hold. If I laid this flat, I would be coming from the top, but I would also have to be coming way down from the bottom. And I found on this particular shape, having it mounted at an angle, now I can reach all aspects of it. So with that in mind, I have built this rack to hold my carving. It holds it at 45 degrees. As you can see, it's just made up out of scrap wood, heavy plywood, so it's nice and rigid because you're going to be doing a little mallet work. And then the parts themselves are mounted underneath these clamps. You can be as elegant or as simple as necessary, but now you see I have this so I have good access to all parts of it. And then I'll place just a little wedge or a little piece of scrap so that I don't mar the frame when I clamp on it. And then it's clamped to the bench. Now from the standpoint of tools, as you can see, we're not going to use very many. We'll use a number 1 straight chisel. I have a fishtail here, but a straight would be all right. I have a number 2 very shallow gouge. I have a number 6 by 12 millimeter or ½ inch for the main cutting, and then I have a number 7 by about a 6 millimeter or quarter of an inch to cut the grooves in the top of the element. The knife can be used if you want for some of the areas. It's kind of nice for just a little bit of cleaning up if it's necessary. So those are all the tools that you're going to need. Now I can't emphasize any stronger that you really need to have sharp tools for this. A lot of the work is very delicate. This being mahogany, it's a little bit chippy. So you need to have good, clean cuts. So you can only do that with good, sharp tools. So be sure you're sharp. They're all tuned up, stropped, and you're ready to carve. Now the important part of this is to get very consistent results. You want everything, all these elements to look the same. So to do that, there's a few things you have to think about. First of all, aside from having the very sharp tools, is to be comfortable. If you're hunched over, you're in an awkward position, you're not going to get the consistent results that you want. So that you want to be comfortable, you want to stand so that you face the work evenly. The height of your workbench, the height of your carving is really very important. If you're bending over constantly, you're not going to get the results. So stand comfortably, holding the tool properly, and then you can get into this rhythm of carving. Now, what you do is you do not carve each individual element. You carve one cut at a time and do the whole length of your carving. Then you come back and then do another series of cuts. This way you get into a rhythm, you get the correct position, and then every cut will be exactly the same as the one previous to it. So now all we have to do is to get started carving. Now when I do these, I prefer to use a mallet. This way I can get a nice consistent depth, and I just put the corner of my tool at the center line, roll it over, and make my cut. I'm coming in at a slight angle. Rather than going straight down, it helps to define the edge and it makes it a little bit stronger. Now we just start coming back. As you can see, I just did one type of cut for the entire length. I like a light mallet for this particular carving today. My theory is there's no sense carrying a heavy mallet for a light cut. I like to just pick the mallet that fits the depth of cut that I'm going to be doing. This wood is so soft, I could probably have pushed it in by hand, but the mallet will give me much more consistent depth and therefore consistent results. Now those stop cuts are all complete. Now we go to the next step using the same tool and starting to define where the dart will go. So here, just plunge in and the piece should drop out. If you leave any little roughness or any material left, don't go back now and clean it up. Get the initial cut done first. Now we just start working our way back. Again, comfortable position. You just move down. You don't change your body position very much at all. You don't change the way you hold the tool. The only difficulty here is the boredom factor. Don't let your mind wander. Just pop these out as you go along. Now we've defined the outline of the egg, and then by coming in here through the side, we are defining the sides of each one of the darts. Now, there may be places where the chip didn't come out very cleanly, very evenly. Now is the time to go back and check them. Here's one here, just to pop out that little extra piece. You don't want to do that while you're doing your carving. It's just going to interrupt the flow of your work. Come back and do those as a separate piece. Another little one here that I can clean out. And then that whole area now is completed. The next step is to define the little grooves that go in. That is done with a number 7 chisel, using your center line as your reference. This is where putting in that center line was important. We also drew that little line that was probably 1/8 of an inch up from the crest here. That is going to define where we start our cuts. And now it's going to be the same thing. We just start at one end and work our way through. Now we're going to carve this little shallow groove along the top for decoration. This is why we had this center line. This is going to be your guide. Stay off that center line slightly so there's a little bit of space in between. You can either use a mallet which I rather like to do, or you can just do it by hand. But when you come to the end at the top, don't plow into that shoulder. Otherwise, you're going to leave a cut from the tool that's going to show. It's going to be very hard to get it out again. And I'm using that pencil mark as my starting point. This is why we put that mark in there. I like to use a mallet because it's much more precise for this delicate work than, at least I find, with my hands. I have also marked in a lot of the design with a ultra-fine marking pen just for visibility for today. Normally I wouldn't do that on this because I'm not going to be carving a lot of those lines away, and the result will be that you would have to do a lot of sanding to get these marks out. So it's much better to do it in pencil just as easily, probably faster. But even though this is production, you don't want to go too fast. But you can see the necessity of a good sharp tool, that all of your pressure is cutting. You're not crushing or forcing your way through your work. The result that you're going to get a lot of chip out. And if you do a very large picture frame this way, by the time you get to the last section of carving, you're going to be an expert. After all, you've done quite a few hundred of these. Now that completes the groove. This area between each element is very fragile. It's very delicate. So there's two approaches to doing this. Sometimes I will take a knife and just put in a stop cut to define the center of that cut. And you can just step your way right along. And get those defined. Another approach is to use a straight chisel, and you can just come down and define these. Run these right up to the shoulder. You can see here we just step our way around. And I'll just continue right on down the line, and then we'll come back and finish that. Now the center stop cut is completed. Now it's just a matter of using the straight chisel to cut these pieces out. Again, just do one side. Come back and do the other side. The less tool changing in your hand, the better. Once you've got her going, stay with it. I like this straight fishtail. It's a very handy tool. Now I will come back and get the other side. If a piece doesn't come out, leave it. Come back to it. You see, I have my hand in one position and I'm just staying with that position. There was one that it didn't come out cleanly at all. I'll come back and get that. Now they're completed. I can come back now and clean out those few that did not come out as cleanly as I would like. There's a little bit of detail there that needs to be taken care of. Here's a nice one that needs a little work. The next detail to do is to just round these corners off, just break them to get away from this rough sharpness. And I'm using a number 2, just peeling off a little bit. Now this curve is quite noticeable, so this is where you want to be nice and consistent. Just, it's one cut, roll the tool up. Start it in, roll it up. I like a fairly straight, flat gouge for this rather than opting for a curved tool that will make a nice radius. It's a little harder to control, where the straight one, you can just put it exactly where you want. Now here's an example of, there's one area in here that didn't quite clean out. Now that I can see it. Now I'll just come back from the other side, get myself in a comfortable position, and walk, step my way right down the line. I think by now you can see how useful this clamping device is. Now I'm just going to go over it and clean up, remove some of my guidelines. Check. This is time to just go over it. Any little fuzzies that are left. Get some of my guidelines. And then now I can see if there's any little detail that has to be taken care of. Here's a little spot that just didn't come quite clean enough. This is the time you can just pick those out. There's another. They always seem to show up after you've done some sanding. Now here's a nice little way to use for cleaning out any little debris that's left. I just use a rather stiff finger brush or a little stiff brush such as this. This was sold as a basting brush that you can make your own handles for, and it just gets all the debris out. The stiff finger brush is nice because it actually will remove any little fibers that have been left, yet it does not change the shape. It isn't like it's sanding and cleaning out. So now everything is done. All the carving is completed. There's just one more detail that has to be done, and that is detailing a little mark at the top. Now where this division between each element comes up to the shoulder, it's hard to get a good clean finish there. So I use this simple old nail, flathead nail. I've sharpened it to a sharp point but slightly rounded to give a nice shape, and I'm just punch right in that area between the two, and that leaves a nice finished area. Pushes the fuzzies and the fibers down. This is something to remember. This could be something in a future issue about using punches. You can make punches of different shapes, different designs to punch in a background. Sometimes carved background perfectly flat can be very uninteresting. But by punching, you can fill it in with a even or a random pattern, and it just fills it in very nicely without the distraction of just a perfectly plain surface. One problem that you're going to have to make a decision about is as to how you're going to terminate these different elements. You have two choices, three actually. The first choice would be to come up evenly and finish, as I have done on the model that I've just carved. The other approach is to come up and leave half of an element so it will match the other half element coming from the other side. That's another way of doing it. In both cases, you're going to have to do a little bit of carving in here to blend it and make it look real. The third way is, and we haven't covered this at all, and it's a very traditional, is to leave this entire area here uncarved. Then carve perhaps a flowing leaf or a couple of leaves to completely fill in that area so that these egg and dart elements appear to go underneath these leaves. Again, this is an aesthetic choice. It's whatever you want to do. As far as layout is concerned, it's exactly the same. Where you're going to have a half element, you just simply move your lines over 1/2 of an element. But the number of elements will stay the same. The spacing will stay the same. It's just how you want these corners to appear. Now that you've completed the carving, now you can glue your frame together. Then the type of finish that you put on it, of course, is as you would on any picture frame. It's entirely up to you. And then you can just go and enjoy your work. Thanks for watching. I'm Dave Reilly for Woodworking at Home.